Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Men in Cars, the podcast where we talk about the history of motorsport with or without men. I hope you guys are doing good. Don't know why I said good morning just now, because, I mean, it might be morning when you're listening to it. If you are an avid listener, it might be morning. You might have set an alarm for 7 in the morning for when these episodes come out. I don't know. But I hope you guys are having a good week. Hope you're looking forward to the Monaco Grand Prix this weekend. I definitely am. I am hoping it's going to be exciting. So as you've probably seen by the title, today we are talking about the Monaco Grand Prix. And I wanted to look at this circuit not only because it is the real life Monaco Grand Prix this week. So, you know, it's good to have a bit of background knowledge going into it. Maybe I'll give you some amazing insights and you'll watch it if you are watching it feeling like you know a little bit extra. But also I feel like the Monaco Grand Prix in particular is known so well as a sporting event, even outside of motorsport, that when you look at which drivers really kind of excelled here, it's such a testament to their skill. And also it's really fascinating because I'm sure when you think of countries that would be good, what landscapes would be good as a racetrack, you would never think of somewhere like Monaco. You would never be like, oh, let's get a tiny little country and completely disrupt the entire dynamic of a whole country for a weekend, a couple of weekends a year. So it's really interesting that when you think of motorsport, you think of Monaco, or vice versa. Maybe that would make more sense. So we're just going to have a look at why the Monaco Grand Prix started, why Monaco felt the need to put on such a sporting event, and then we'll look at the early Grand Prix, so pre-Formula One Grand Prix. And like I said, lots of prominent figures who have seen great success at Monaco. And then just kind of how this event has really impacted the residents, how it's impacted tourism and the kind of general reputation of Monaco, predominantly in terms of its kind of influence in Europe. So for those of you who don't know, Monaco is a tiny country. It's the second smallest country in the world, I believe. The smallest is the Vatican City, and it's on the French Riviera, just on the border between Italy and France. So being so small in itself is a very defining attribute, I'd say. It's just under 2 square kilometres in area, which is absolutely tiny. I'm not sure for reference what that would be, but I'm sure if you see pictures of Monaco, you can literally see the entire country just stood on a hill. So it has kind of approximately 38,000 residents, but only about kind of 9,500-ish of those are actually Monegasque kind of nationals. I feel like when you look at the history of Monaco, it's constantly trying to reinstate its kind of national identity, and having such a small population, it had to be done through different means, essentially. So if you live in Monaco, you don't have to pay any income tax, basically. So that means lots of people who are very wealthy, who want to protect their wealth, will move to Monaco, which I didn't realise this until embarrassingly recently, because I thought, I was just like, oh, so many racing drivers, they just live in Monaco just because they love their sport. It reminds them of their sport, but alas, no, it is because they get a very hefty pay rise if you live there. So with kind of about, I think it's 30% of the population being millionaires, the culture in Monaco is really developed into one of kind of glamour and really intense consumption. So this includes the popularity of gambling in Monaco. It's kind of similar to Las Vegas, I suppose. Lots of people would go to Monaco to try and win a fortune. And I think, as we'll see in the development of the Grand Prix, I think Monaco spent a lot of the 20th century trying to kind of distance themselves from that. So I'm just going to go into some of the main features of the track as you might see it today before we look into the main history and development of it. So the track is very similar actually to how it was in 1929. It is a temporary street circuit, so about just over 2 miles long. And as you might imagine, with a motor race being held in such a small country, it is known for being very narrow. So you've got kind of very narrow gaps, particularly between the Hotel de Paris and the casino, particularly in the harbour. So it's always been extremely notorious for being very difficult and easy to crash in, basically. There aren't many opportunities to go at as high speeds in circuits such as, I don't know, Spa or Monza. So it's maybe considered to be less dangerous or less potentially fatal for those reasons, just because if you do crash, it's most likely not going to be at tremendous speeds, but still, it's tricky for the drivers. So there are no kind of wide runoff areas, no gravel. Another tricky feature is that there are very frequent elevation changes, and also the famous tunnel that the drivers have to go through can cause problems in terms of light. So, even though you go through it very quickly, the changes between dark and light for the drivers is something that isn't in any other circuits in the Formula One calendar. And there have been multiple incidents involving that tunnel, drivers going through it and being kind of being startled by the sun and then crashing into the barriers opposite. And Nelson Piquet has famously described Monaco as like trying to ride your bicycle around your living room, which I think is very true. And will have become even more true since his days of racing, as Formula One cars have obviously gotten a lot bigger and used to greater speeds. So as is kind of very evident by the Grand Prix in the past few years, it's really hard to overtake in Formula One cars, which has put into perspective, is Monaco maybe the best track to have on the calendar? Kind of what is it adding? Is it just going to be an opportunity for drivers to crash and waste money? So people are really raising questions nowadays into aspects like that. And is it just being held in Formula One because of the glamour associated with it? And how long can you kind of go on like that? I mean, I won't kind of go into all of that because we are a history podcast and this is very much current events. But I don't know. I think as an event for the viewer, it is still a very enjoyable experience. And even though, that's probably predominantly to do with the location, I think you could say exactly the same thing about loads of the newer races like Las Vegas. Maybe Las Vegas will be really good, but I'm a bit suspicious. And since the Monaco Grand Prix started back in 1929, the lap speed has increased by an excess of kind of 70%. So I think kind of what the track offers has really shifted throughout the years. So back in the 1920s, the idea of having a Grand Prix in Monaco was thought of by Anthony Nogies, who was the General Commissioner for the Monaco Automobile Club, and wanted to start a race, or more an event really, that would attract visitors and kind of boost Monaco's reputation in the world of motoring, and more generally you could say in its reputation as a kind of independent, strong country that could be very prominent in motor racing. So the 1929 Monaco Grand Prix was won by William Grover in a Bugatti, and it was considered a huge success. So it lasted maybe 4 hours and there were only 2 minor casualties, which in those days was a raging success and everyone loved it. So at that time it was an invitation only, so the driver or the car company even had to be invited by the automobile club, I'm guessing, and the prize money was 100,000 francs. So drivers and kind of automobile companies really reacted very well. So even though at that time with the kind of lower car speeds, it was very tricky, so therefore only the most skilled drivers could really excel there. So it was seen as a place that could test drivers, and if they could win a race there, then that would really boost their reputation in motorsport. So like most aspects of motor racing races were obviously stopped during the Second World War, and Grand Prix are kind of held sporadically in the post-war years. So we had 1948, 1950, 1952, and then as we get to 1955, the Monaco Grand Prix became a permanent fixture in the Formula One calendar and has been ever since, really, apart from 2020 or 2021 due to COVID. But apart from that, it's been really known as the jewel in the crown of Formula One. So the most prestigious, the most important race. So even in those early years, kind of Formula One was the most popular form of motor racing. So for Monaco to be so closely associated with that championship, it really elevated the status of Monaco and the status of motor racing in Monaco. And because of the nature of Formula One, if you wanted to win a certain Grand Prix, you had to be part of a team for kind of at least a year or an entire season. So that adds a kind of extra level of difficulty and complexity to the Grand Prix, because you have to be really committed, you have to really excel in other races and other aspects of motoring before you can even have an opportunity to race in Monaco. And this makes this Grand Prix really unique when you think of what's known as the Triple Crown of racing, which is essentially kind of an unofficial achievement which involves winning 3 motor races, which are the Indy 500, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and the Monaco Grand Prix. So for the Indy 500 and Le Mans, I'm not saying they're easier, because they're definitely not, but Formula One has always kind of been known as the pinnacle of motor racing. So to be involved in that championship, to form a relationship with the team and then excel and win at Monaco, that is definitely a huge accolade. So as Formula One kind of grew throughout the 60s, you have motorsport sponsorship really begin to be a huge factor in the workings and the dynamics of Grand Prix, not just at Monaco, but all of them really. So because of the amount of traction to the Monaco Grand Prix, it became really important commercially, as well as being, for many people, a key social event as well as a sporting event. So lots of business was done in Monaco, and I'm sure even today, out of all the races, it's really the one where everyone wants to go and be part of what feels like a smaller community of kind of the rich and famous. So I think I'll talk a bit more about the dynamics of the Monaco Grand Prix as an event at the end of this episode, but before we do that, I thought it would be fun to look at some of the famous races, some of the famous drivers, because as I said at the beginning, you really get to see so many drivers at their best. And many of the Formula One drivers that are known as some of the best, many of their best achievements are at Monaco. So pre-Formula One, one of the most popular drivers to drive at Monaco was Tazio Nuvolari, who drove in 1932 in an Alfa Romeo, and was Alfa Romeo's first win at Monaco, actually. And he was really popular with fans due to his kind of really fearless driving style, and he had a very recognisable racing helmet as well. So being able to see him in his prime, but with his driving style kind of really testing the track, that must have been really incredible to see. And in his time kind of racing, he had so many crashes. He has about 17 serious crashes and broke nearly like every bone in his body, and fans would joke that he had a pact with the devil because he just kept surviving, which was not very common with drivers that had serious crashes in those days. So when we look at the Monaco Grand Prix kind of throughout the 50s and 60s, we really see the dominance and skill of Juan Manuel Fangio, who was known by many as kind of the best racing driver for decades and decades. So he won 5 world championships overall in his career, which was only beaten by Michael Schumacher in 2002, I believe. So for many years, it kind of winning 5 world championships was this really untouchable number. So many drivers that raced with him at the time wanted to beat him, and in the decades after he retired, it was really a goal to kind of reach his status. So throughout this period, there was a real rivalry between Fangio and Stirling Moss. So Fangio won the Monaco Grand Prix in 1950 and 1957, and Moss won in 56, 60 and 61. So this rivalry really captured the public's imagination, like many rivalries have done since. But this, in the specific context for the Monaco Grand Prix, really helped establish it as a global event. And not just that, but the F1 Championship kind of overall, it really made it a media spectacle. So to see these two drivers battle in such a close proximity in Monaco would have been such a desirable event, really. So even though Moss won more Grand Prix at Monaco, Fangio definitely kind of won that rivalry overall, I'd say. Moss never actually won a world championship, and he is considered by many to be the best Formula One driver that never won a championship. And I think that's so difficult because it, like many drivers who have never won world championships, who perhaps deserve to, is down to kind of a lot of factors. But I think his stance of being very adamant that he only wanted to drive British-made cars probably hindered him overall. But he did really excel at Monaco, mainly because of his skill at kind of car control, and he performed really well in wet conditions as well, which was seen particularly in 1960. And Fangio had similar attributes to his driving style, I think. So he was well renowned for his accuracy, his precision, which again are very good skills to have at Monaco. And that similarity is probably what made their rivalry so popular. Now, as we move forward a couple of years, we see the driver who has earned the nickname the King of Monaco, and that is Graham Hill. Now, he is the only driver in history to have completed that Triple Crown of motorsports, so that's Monaco Grand Prix, Indy 500 and Le Mans, and he has won the Monaco Grand Prix 5 times, so in 63, 64, 65, 68 and 69. So Graham Hill was really a sensation in motorsport, kind of like no other, I think. He is considered really to be the greatest driver of his generation, and his performance in Monaco is definitely a huge contributing factor to this. That, and as you can kind of see by the accolade of the Triple Crown of motorsport, kind of the diverse nature of his skill was really shown there. There is an excellent documentary on him on YouTube. I can't remember what it's called, but it's presented by Jeremy Irons, which is a bit random, but it is very good. And if you don't know, Graham Hill's son is Damon Hill, who won the 1996 World Championship. And during this time, Jackie Stewart was also a prominent figure, winning in 66, 71 and 73. And then we have Niki Lauda, who won twice in 1975 and 1976, but he kind of stands out because when he won in 1976, it was the first win at Monaco for Ferrari in 20 years. So I think within Ferrari, and when you think of Monaco, he is definitely a prominent figure as well. So as we kind of move on to the 1980s, the early 1990s, of course, the racing at Monaco was completely dominated by Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna. So between 1984 and 1993, so nearly an entire decade, Monaco was only won by these two drivers. And Senna actually has the record for the most successive wins at Monaco, as well as the most overall. So he's won 6 times between 1987 and 1993, and between 1989 and 1993 he won all of those years. And I think it wouldn't be outlandish to say at all that at Monaco Senna was really the best driver to drive that track. I mean it's really incredible, and particularly considering he was still in the prime of his career when he passed away, unfortunately, in the Imola Grand Prix in 1994. So many think that he could have won at Monaco many more times if that had not been the case. I'm watching footage of Senna driving at Monaco. It's almost kind of like mesmerising. I mean, to be completely honest, being a relatively new motorsport fan, when you look on paper, you think that even though Senna achieved incredible things, he won 3 world championships. Can't remember off the top of my head how many Grand Prix, but many people consider him to be the greatest racing driver of all time. And I never kind of could completely understand that, but when you watch footage of him driving, particularly at Monaco, it is absolutely incredible. I think in the documentary Senna about his life, there's a clip of him driving around Monaco and describing how he felt in that moment, and it is really incredible. He described it as kind of being like he didn't have to think, he just did it, he just drove around. It was like he was one with the car. It really seems like he was made to drive that track. And so all of his really strengths as a driver, so car control in wet conditions, his concentration, his unique tactics, which were quite different to lots of Formula One drivers at the time, and his skill to really carry that speed through those really, really tight corners and weave through back markers and traffic with such finesse is absolutely incredible to watch. So it's really heartbreaking that his career was cut so short, because I'm sure what he would have been able to achieve in Formula One and at Monaco would have been so above any other drivers before him and potentially to this day. So in the years after Senna passed away, we have obviously the dominance of Michael Schumacher. So Schumacher won in 94, 95, 97, 99 and 2001. Now, Michael Schumacher is often kind of compared to Senna, particularly, as I said before, Senna was considered the best racing driver of all time, and then you've got Michael Schumacher, who on paper, in terms of records, could be considered to be better. He's got kind of more race wins, more world championships. But again, it's incredibly hard to compare racing drivers in general, but particularly Senna and Schumacher, because whilst they did race on the same grid, Schumacher was still really in the early stages of his career when Senna was alive and racing. So I don't know if at Monaco I would maybe consider Schumacher to be superior, although he does still hold the lap record at Monaco. So in the past decades, we haven't kind of had one driver dominate Monaco as much as perhaps happened in the periods I've just described. So it tends to just be following who is dominating the championship as a whole, really, whether that be Mercedes or Red Bull. So on a track where crashes are so common, there have been a lot of kind of incidents that seem very unique compared to those that would happen at other circuits. So in 1955 and then again in 1965, we had crashes which seem like an obvious inevitability that you would try and avoid, and that is cars coming off the circuit and going into the harbour, into the water. Now, I'll just start by saying both of these crashes, the drivers were fine. They were not fatal. And actually, quite miraculously, the drivers were quite unharmed, but, you know. So in 1955, Alberto Ascari was in a Ferrari and he missed a chicane, went into the harbour and was completely unharmed, which for that period, for those cars, seems impossible. But, you know, these things happen. And unfortunately, despite being unharmed in this incident, he was actually killed in testing 4 days later in Monza, which is one of those tracks which is incredibly high speed, but still kind of such a surprising incident considering the dangerous or shocking nature of his crash at Monaco. And then again in 1965, Paul Hawkins kind of span out of control, car went into the harbour and was also unharmed. And the footage of his crash was actually used in a film in 1966 called Grand Prix, which I haven't watched personally, but it's on my watch list. And that kind of makes such perfect movie material, I feel like, just a car going into the harbour. I don't know why they didn't try and prevent that. I mean, I suppose in those decades they weren't really thinking too hard about the consequences of crashing at all. But, you know. So in the history of Formula One, there have only been 2 fatal crashes at Monaco, and so that was Luigi Fagiolo in 1962 and then Lorenzo Bandini in 1967. Now, Fagiolo had previously won a race at Monaco actually in 1935 and unfortunately crashed while practicing for a support race. And for Bandini, he was running in second place in the 1967 Grand Prix, but then crash into a guardrail, and the fragility of those cars at that time meant that his fuel tank erupted and ignited nearby straw bales. And in 1992, there was a Lorenzo Bandini trophy that was established and is awarded kind of annually to any outstanding figures in motorsport. And since then, there have been no fatal crashes at Monaco, and this is partly down to the new safety features that were implemented in the 1970s, but I think in general, the kind of tight corners of this circuit mean that crashes are more likely to produce expensive damage for the cars rather than be fatal like other circuits. So now we've seen the Monaco Grand Prix's kind of success and impact in motor racing. It's really fascinating to see its impact on the kind of economic sector of Monaco and what it means for tourism and for their national culture as well. So I touched on this in the beginning, but this kind of segues into the discussions about Monaco today. So services are by quite a large portion the most important part of Monaco's economic sector in terms of kind of general revenue, and being a site of major sporting events has kind of transcended motorsport as well. So you've got kind of tennis masters, show jumping, football, gymnastics, so lots of events that are being crammed into such a tiny space, or such a kind of unexpected space, if that. So that does bear the question of what kind of negative repercussions that could have for the population. So you've got kind of stuff like noise pollution, traffic congestion, crowding, closing of roads, and kind of impacts on local businesses as well are some of the negatives that have been brought up. There was a study done on the 2012 Monaco Grand Prix that kind of weighed up lots of statistics about the impact the Grand Prix had on the local people, and overall it kind of concluded that whilst all those reasons I've just listed are certainly kept in mind by some people, overall I think the people of Monaco are really proud of the role motorsport holds in their culture. Because if you think about it, for the entire population, having Grand Prix in their country will be a consistent event in everyone's living memory. I mean, I can't think of if anyone could even remember or was even alive before Grand Prix were held there. So lots of people see it kind of in an economic sense as an opportunity to earn additional income when you have so many people, particularly very wealthy people, that come to this country and want to spend money. But also in terms of entertainment, you know, even though kind of roads get closed and the Grand Prix track kind of takes over the entire country, it would be such an entertaining event for locals, particularly in the past few years where they've had Charles Leclerc, who is a Monegasque driver. So having that enthusiasm in such a small town must be a really special experience, I imagine. And this disruption to daily life was certainly contested in the early years of the Grand Prix, so in the kind of 20s and 30s. But this kind of, like I said, was quickly accepted as a normality. And the benefits that Monaco as a country would get from it really outweighed any negatives that their government might face. And it would definitely be fair to say that even though in motorsport or Formula One as a whole, that sense of glamour, prestige, almost kind of elitism is really associated with the championship as a whole, this is definitely really concentrated at Monaco. So I think that brings us to the end of this little summary of the history of Monaco and what the cultural implications of this race really means. So, as I said before, this week is the Monaco Grand Prix. If you are watching in real time, as I'm recording, it is the 24th of May, which is what day of the week is it? Wednesday. I hope this Grand Prix will be, eventful for the right reasons. Not going to jinx myself, but I will say that as of today, the 24th of May, 2023, the only Monaco-born driver to win was Louis Chiron in 1931. 1931! So, I'm just going to say that. I'm not going to say anything more. I'm not going to get my hopes up, because let's be honest, I think we know probably which team are going to win. But as I said before, the winner in itself does not detract away from the spectacle of this weekend, of the event in general. Even though I'm acting like I'll be there, I won't. I'll just be here. So anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed that little episode. As I did last week, I'll leave the sources in the description. Not sure if the links will work because they didn't last time. And I'll try and upload a few little clips on TikTok. So follow Men in Cars Pod on TikTok, on Instagram, where I'll post kind of extra pictures. And yes, I'm trying to work on some audio clips on TikTok. So watch out for those. And please subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening. Give it a little 5 stars and check out any other episodes. At the moment, I have one on Brooklands, which is from last week, and I have a little introduction. If you're watching this in the future, feel free to check out any of the other ones. And yeah, I will see you next week, where we will be talking about Roberta Cowell, which I'm very much looking forward to. So yeah. Thank you again for listening, and see you later. Bye.